K-pop Demon Hunters is mostly efficient with its low runtime usage, having most of its scenes fulfill multiple purposes at one time. But not all scenes in the movie are equally good, and there is even one scene that is legitimately bad, which is why I'm going to be comparing that scene to another scene from K-pop Demon Hunters that was good. The scene I'm talking about, of course, is the Play Games With Us scene, and I'm gonna be comparing it to the Dr. Han scene. Let's quickly summarize what happens in the scenes before delving deeper into them. In the Dr. Han scene, the Huntrix girls have come to Dr. Han's clinic as part of Zoe's brilliant plan to restore Rumi's voice. However, Dr. Han is unable to determine why Rumi's voice is in trouble because Rumi has lots of walls up. Rumi denies this, but Mira and Zoe disagree and tease Rumi together about it. Then Dr. Han also briefly analyzes Zoe and Mira before the girls head out of the clinic with the voice restoring juice. In the Play Games With Us scene, the Huntrix girls have come to kill the Saja boys, but instead of waiting for the show to be over and potentially covering the exits, they walk up these stairs to the top of the stage, which leads to Ginu noticing them and forcing them to participate in the show. The girls then take the slide down the ball pit and briefly participate in the show, after which the Saja boys manage to escape to the nearby bathhouse. Now you might have already noticed that there's something weird about that. The Huntrix girls take the stairs up to the stage, which allows Ginu to notice them, which leads to them being dragged into the show, and then the Saja boys escaping. But the girls had no reason to do this. They already perfectly saw the stage from where they were standing, and they could have stayed there or, like I said, covered the exits, but going into the rear view of the Saja boys and potentially the audience makes no sense whatsoever. The hunters didn't need to do this, and it doesn't make sense for them to have done that. That's of course if we assume that the hunters are competent, which I'm inclined to believe. So justifying this as the Huntrix girls being incompetent doesn't make sense. This element makes the entire sequence contrived, and just so we're all on the same page, a plot contrivance is a forced event in the story that doesn't make sense with the continuity of the movie. In short, it's the story forcing something that doesn't make sense. The plot simply forced the Huntrix girls onto the stage so that they could have this brief comedic sequence, which is ultimately unnecessary. While the Dr. Han scene is not contrived or unnecessary in the slightest. While you could say that Zoe's plan is rather questionable, with everything that's been established about her personality and character, I don't see it as a contrivance. And besides just advancing the plot and adding comedy, the Dr. Han scene develops all of the characters and sets up the big payoff of the movie, of Rumi choosing to not hide her patterns any longer. That's why the Dr. Han scene is a much better scene than the Play Games With Us scene, even if it wasn't contrived. The Play Games With Us scene only advances the plot and has comedy, but doesn't do anything else. While you could try to argue that the scene does a small bit of world building, in the sense that the Saja boys are getting more popular, but the movie already has a ton of scenes that already establish this. And even if we say that this scene does world building, it's shallow at best. While the Dr. Han scene has a lot of depth in character development and setting up the big payoff of the movie. And of course the Dr. Han scene also advances the plot, but not in a contrived way. What you could say is contrived though is that the Saja boys are performing nearby from Dr. Han's clinic, and that when the Huntrix girls literally walk out of the clinic, they immediately run into the Saja boys. But since it's a contrivance of the Saja boys choosing that specific place to do their live show, the Dr. Han scene is not contrived. But why should scenes do multiple things at once? And why am I analyzing this? Let's say the Play Games With Us scene wouldn't be contrived. Would it be a good scene then? I would say that even if the scene wasn't contrived, it still doesn't perform any specific function within the movie and is thus unnecessary. Because let's say we remove this entire Play Games With Us sequence, we briefly show that the Saja boys won the hot sauce challenge and the Huntrix girls either intercept them on their way out or they follow them into the nearby bathhouse. The movie doesn't really lose anything, just the comedic part of the Huntrix girls going down the slide slowly because of their leather clothing, so some comedic value, but that's it. Imagine if the movie had this extra minute that this scene took up to establish the world or add more depth in general that's lacking from the movie. Like it could have been used to establish that the Hunters songs have the ability to erase memories about demons, or how the general public is still still unaware of what happened after the battle in Namsan Tower. Things that would have been much more important for the film than comedy. And while you might think that a minute is a low amount of time, it's really not. K-pop Demon Hunters itself has a relatively low runtime of just 1 hour 25 minutes when you remove the credits and logos. And you can really do a lot with a minute. Like the Dr. Han scene is just over 2 minutes, but accomplishes a lot more for the movie. The movie would really lose a lot if the Dr. Han scene were to be removed, because then the payoff would be less meaningful and we would have less established characters. While I would say that the movie would actually be better if the Play Games With Us scene was removed or replaced. The reason why I'm talking about this specific scene is because I think it to be the only bad scene in the entire movie that I would actually want to replace or remove. Because overall K-pop Demon Hunters is effective enough with its scenes in general, but this scene felt really out of place with the rest of the movie, because of its nature of being entirely forced. But why is this important? Why can't a movie or a TV series have a scene that has just comedy, even if it's contrived? Because that really detracts from the continuity of what has been established before in the movie. If we want to say that the scene was deliberate in terms of the writers wanting to make the hunters seem incompetent or overeager or inexperienced in their work, I just don't believe that. I can absolutely get behind the idea that the hunters are not perfect in the craft of demon hunting, but if the movie wants to establish this, this was not the correct way to do so. And if the movie really wants to make the current hunters incompetent, the movie would have to be rewritten entirely, because the Huntrix girls have been doing this at least for the last 6 years. They would not be inexperienced. In fact, from what we see in the beginning of the movie, they're extremely competent at what they do, as both K-pop idols and demon hunters. Of course, Rumi is now more reckless and impulsive, but especially Zoe, who was reserved about even killing the Saja boys, wouldn't have just blindly followed Rumi. Or if the movie wanted to take the angle that going to the top of the stage was a mistake that Rumi made because she has grown more reckless, that could have been done, but it would have needed additional exposition. The movie could have had a brief sequence before the girls go to the top of the stage that could have established this. Rumi would want to go to the top of the stage, but Zoe would be more skeptical, saying that it would be more risky and could lead to them being noticed. Mira could agree with Zoe at first, but ultimately Rumi could convince them to follow her. Of course, that still wouldn't fix the fact that even if Rumi is really reckless and is making bad decisions, that she would just move into the rear view of Genu. But this would have made the scene substantially better. That alternative scene would have added depth and would have made the entire sequence more meaningful, and it would build towards the later part of the movie, where Zoe and Mira no longer trust Rumi. If the scene had played out like this, even if the Huntrix girls were pulled onto the stage and we would have had the slide comedy sequence, in that scenario, I still would have wanted to keep this sequence in the movie, but the way it is now, it's not worth keeping in the movie. But let's say if the scene wasn't contrived, and the hunters were dragged onto the stage in an alternative way that would make sense and did not undermine the competence of the hunters. It would have still then just advanced the plot and added comedy. But is that bad? Not necessarily. I can definitely get behind comedic scenes that only advance the plot, like Genu pushing Rumi over in slow motion. But that scene is actually better, because it also does character development, in terms of the love interests between the Huntrix girls and the Saja boys, which is why that comedic scene is much better. Because it's important for a movie to have scenes that manage to do more than just advancing the plot and adding comedy. Especially in a movie like K-pop Demon Hunters that has a relatively low runtime, which is actually why K-pop Demon Hunters is pretty good at using its limited screen time efficiently, managing to combine multiple elements at once. But the Play Games With Us scene unfortunately doesn't manage to hold up to that standard. And the movie would have been better off just removing it, or better yet, replacing it with an alternative scene that could have added more depth in character development and world building. On the other hand, if the Dr. Han scene were to be removed, the movie would really lose a lot. And ultimately the biggest distinction between the Play Games With Us scene and the Dr. Han scene is that the Dr. Han scene is not contrived, so it doesn't break the continuity of the movie.